Hi, my name's Gabe Flashman, and for those of you who don't know me, I help people around the world create amazing content. So anything from webinars and vodcasts to articles and blogs to corporate and social video. And this is the Comms Content and Conversation Vodcast. This week I'm joined by Keith Lewis from Zurich UK. He's social media manager there. And what was it that appealed to you about social? You kind of saw that it was kicking off, that this was the new platform, I'm imagining, and I was very much in the same boat, I think, actually. And what was it that excited you about that?
Some of it was just the opportunity. I mean, at the time, the reason we started it was back in when Twitter was just starting to become a thing in 08, 09. It was about preventing cyber squatting. So it wasn't this great strategy of we need to do this because it's there are real people out there who are engaging with it. It was to stop people nicking our handles. That was the start of it. And of course, once we've got them, we then started to think, well, now we've got them. If this is a big thing, and Facebook had been around for quite a while there, LinkedIn, of course, at the same time. We started to see these platforms building. Twitter obviously developed as it grew, and then we realized that there really was an opportunity. So let's flip it. Let's start to at least engage with people, because as an insurer before that, we were very much you come in through a formal channel and we deal with you during that process. And sometimes that's not directly with us because we're heavily intermediated both on the life insurance and the general broker perspective. So you don't often, as an insurance company, we don't talk to you as a customer. It's done through a number of different routes. So that was the thing that kind of way back at the time, that was the trigger point. But then as we've gone, we've realized the power that social can have in helping that A to B message thing that we just talked about, because anyone who works in social and owns a corporate or company branded channel knows full well how really, really hard it is to get any traction, to get any organic reach. I've got some great examples that I can tell you about if you want, about how big we've grown an audience and how fewer people see the stuff that we put out through those channels. But what we've realized, and what I've realized over the years, is that the way to do that is to sort of democratize communications, to reculture or unculture an organization, if that's even a word. Say, well, back in the day when I came back, when I was in Zurich and when I first came back, the press office spoke out loud on behalf of the firm in a very corporate way. And we sense check every message that's going out, we cleanse it. And obviously social changes all that. That can't be a thing anymore. It can't work like that. Unfortunately, the firm has been great in accepting that that's part of it. We still have to do the media relations the traditional way of making sure the messaging is right. That's still the same for us. But we then encourage people to help us to get that reach out there, to talk about the things that are important to them, that are important to both of us, and finding those niche areas where we can really make hay with that overlapping Venn circles, if you like, Venn diagram circles.
So it's about finding evangelists to share your messaging. I'm quite interested just to go back one step though to what you said about trying to get engagement. That has obviously changed a huge amount since we started in social. At the start, it was a lot easier, and we've worked with the World Economic Forum for 6.5 years. So we've gone up from 100,000 followers to over 4 million. So it's huge numbers. And yet engagement is very hard to get, as we know. What's behind that? Is it just sheer numbers and the ubiquity of the platforms and content?
I'm going to use the A word here because there's definitely an algorithm at play here.
Yes.
I think they've been more open about that than ever before. They're saying that they want to prioritize people talking to people. We're hearing new platforms come up all the time. We were just talking about Clubhouse, which is a brand-free zone. It is you talking to me and a bunch of other people, human to human. There's
not for long though, surely, really.
Well, they've been pretty strong. That's one of the ethoses that they have over there, is that they want to keep it P2P, person to person. And if they've got whole platforms building off the back of that, clearly if you look at LinkedIn as a good example, that's all about people networking with people. It always used to be about people finding jobs, but of course most people will know that's far more different nowadays. It's much more engagement. It's a networking, stakeholder management, to some extent, ongoing relationship building. There's loads of different ways through that. So all the platforms do it. So I think we've just got to find a ways to give it. And I'm going to slightly challenge. I think you just said is about sharing your messages. I a little bit of me just recoiled slightly at that, because the last thing I want is for everyone in Zurich in the UK to be spouting out Zurich company material, and branded material, because it won't be authentic to most of them. I mean, if you take an organization like ours, we've got 4,500 people, probably a quarter of those are market facing. They're the ones who are dealing day in, day out with the act of selling insurance. Everybody else is there to support the business and the operation side of thing. So if I take a look at my, as an example, as a social media man, as a media bod, my LinkedIn network is full of people like me. It's got my rugby connections. We can talk about the rugby if you want. I've got people in there who follow me, but very few things in my world are about selling insurance. And I'm not, and we're regulated, so I'm not allowed to. Never mind, even if I wanted to. So we have to find ways of talking about companies in different ways to allow employees to share the good stuff that they're doing. That's not about a sale.
So if it's not, that was I was misspoken from my point of view. Absolutely. If it's not about sharing messages, what is it about? What do you encourage them? What do you enable them to talk about? Is it about stories that they have that lean into the sense of purpose or your values set? So. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, very much so. We've got to make sure that when employees are on social, they're being their authentic them. And we've done a lot of work over the last few years on our corporate culture, the corporate narrative stuff. I know you talked to Sarah Goodall a few episodes ago about this sort of thing, and help figuring out what works for them. And I see it in our metrics all the time. Whenever we make it something that resonates with them, that talks about the things that we know employees are interested in, that's where our engagement goes up. We've just done. We're doing a lot of work, as any large organisation does, on sustainability. Of course, everybody is, and we've been doing it for years. So we've got some credibility in the space here. So we're starting to plant a Zurich forest in Brazil with one of the bigger NGOs out there to start to do that, and that's really resonating with employees. As a global organization, every employee has been literally given a tree to plant, and we were able to do that virtually. We could dig our holes on screen and plant it, and we can choose the type we wanted it to be. But we've just run we're recording this sort of mid-February, and we've just done a Valentine's Day campaign where we've said to people, tag your friends and colleagues in this thing, and we will plant a tree for them. We can't get together. We can't necessarily even get to a card shop at the moment to buy a card to send it to somebody. So let's do it virtually. And that really takes off because it's part of our purpose, our culture about being a sustainable organization. And it makes it real for people. People can really buy into that sort of thing. And it's personal to them. And it's not about insurance.
Yeah, I hear you.
It's about us as a company, as an ethical employer, as a sustainable organization. It's not about a product.
So in that situation, and again, so as an agency, if I go to a client and I pitched something, so I pitched something akin to what you just talked about, I think the way that they would challenge me would be, or I would feel I'd need to justify, what's the benefit for the company? Is there a pressure to demonstrate bottom line outcomes, ROI? How do you demonstrate back to the organisation? It sounds like you've got a very understanding and sensible approach to comms at Zurich, but is there a need to reflect back what's being successful and why?
Yeah, there totally has to be, and it goes back to sort of company strategy and the why, the big story that we're all trying to tell. Yes, we're an insurance company, so at some point we need to sell some insurance, but we also need to remember that we're a large organisation that has a corporate responsibility, and we're also an employer. So lots of the stuff that we focus on, because we're regulated, so there are some things that we talked about we can't do, nor should we do. But we do have to remember that we've got what I refer to as the Zurich story. So the fact that we have our charity that gave £2 million away to communities around the organisation last year to help them get through COVID, that we are a strong, diverse and diverse organisation that needs more diverse people in it. So we're talking about the stuff that we're doing in the D&I space. And that's all talent acquisition and brand. And we can see through some of the metrics that we've got in our employee advocacy tool that we're using, that we know that employees share content, and when employees share content, it's engaged, and that starts to draw a line back into the firm. So we know that there are people who now work for Zurich who first engaged with Zurich as a result of an employee share.
Right.
You can follow the data line all the way through.
Yeah.
So that's an ROI in relationship building, in talent acquisition cost, in getting a hire into a seat that takes years. I mean, there's obviously lots of other things that go into that funnel if we're into talking funnels, but we know that does play into it, because we've got it's brand reach, it's engagement, it's authenticity. We're saving money at the talent acquisition end. So all those costs do add up. But yes, we've got to play to an ROI game. It's very hard to do, and it's not a science. It's an art, not a science. We've got to keep remembering that I have to deliver metrics, and I have to figure out what those metrics look like, and whether they're real metrics or whether they're vanity metrics. Follower numbers mean nothing to me.
No, absolutely. And I think we found that as well. We have to, ordinarily, we were always looking at a hybrid. It's a hybrid of either, if qual and quant, or some sort of hybrid, which then plays into whatever the client wants.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's quite unusual, I think, to hear comms woven so effectively into each division or area of the business, that there is recognition that comms and social plays a large part in lots of different, maybe even slightly intangible aspects of what the business does. Do you think that is a benchmark of how an organisation should weave comms in?
I think you have to. Weave is a great word, actually, because in organisations you often get silos appearing, and people end up in a silo structure, which means they only think about their BU or their business unit or their function or whatever it is, their country unit, whatever that might look like to them. What I think, and one of the skill set I think I've got and I bring to this, is that I always look across. I've always been looking across and trying to figure out how we make sure that we're not seeing something over there and not missing something over there, and we're pulling those strands together. And because that actually helps people tell the story. Because actually, whilst they might be let's say they're in an underwriting function for us, they might be interested in something that finance are doing, or the other way around. But they wouldn't normally know about it, because claims people talk to claims people, and underwriting talk to underwriting, and regions talk to regions. Sometimes they don't talk across, and that's where social really has helped us. And this is where I start to tell an internal story, because having internal social is just as important as having external social. So people think about social media as being Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. For me, a big part of what we've done here, and this isn't me, this is the whole bunch of folk, is using what our platform, we use Workplace, so Facebook's internal only.
Yeah, we use that as well.
It's brilliant. We've really seen a benefit to that, because it democratizes comms. Again, I said that before, but it means that everybody in the firm can tell their own story. That doesn't have to go through the intranet holder. Whoever has access to the intranet doesn't have to be filtered through them and create those bottlenecks. Anyone at Zurich can go onto Workplace and ask anybody else a question or share a story. And we've done a lot of work encouraging people to do that, because if we all feel part of the same firm, and we know what's going on, and we've got channels to allow us to do that, that makes us a better organization. And then parochially, it allows me to figure out who gets social internally, and I can say, well, Grace, you're doing a great job over there. Why don't you do that on LinkedIn? Or Pauline, you're fantastic at this. You've got such a good feel for it. Go and do that on Twitter. And it makes it easier to highlight those, I guess, social stars, if you like.
And so you talked earlier about the storytelling, the importance of that. How do you engender that storytelling, the nuance of that, and do you teach it? I mean, I know as a storyteller myself, I'm like, how do you it's quite often finding and teasing out those stories is so at the heart of what we do, and yet it can be so difficult. How do you do that?
It can be, and I've had some great support over the last couple of years with different managers and different bosses doing the hard graft, I think, in making sure that we've got a good story to tell, or recognizing that if we didn't have a story to tell, we needed one, and how we were going to focus. because there's no great social team at Zurich. It's effectively, well, I'm the only bod
Just you.
with social media in my job title. There are other people who do bits and pieces and look after channels in their own marketing outlets or other stuff. So I'm always trying to figure out how we could do this better, but very much having those stories to tell. And it's great being in, and that is where I like being in the comms side. So the work I've done with my previous bosses, Sophie and Tracy, in the last couple of years has really brought out those stories, because they're getting it from a PR perspective, and how we find the stories that we can tell that are of interest to a wider audience than perhaps a narrower line that's something that's interested to our IFA community or just our thing. We've got to look wide and find ways of doing it. It's great to have that support and that backup, I guess. And some of it's a permission to act quickly. So I very rarely ask permission for things, but I've been around for long enough and I guess clever enough to know when I need to flag things or just check in before I do stuff. Or I can just get on with it. And we see, I didn't do it, but there's been some really good examples in the last few weeks of brand channels getting involved with talking to other brand channels. The Weetabix and Heinz thing.
Awesome. I went through every one of those corporate.
Yeah, it was brilliant.
Yeah,
but that. Yeah, it is natural. I wonder how coordinated some of it was, but that's just the suspicious cynic in me.
The Marmite responses are.
Yeah, some of them are going to be there, but it shows how quickly brand and channel and social channel operators are now got to, and how we've kind of earned our space to do that. So we had some. This is an entirely different scenario, but we ran some adverts last year, which were about our life products, and we used one of the 6 or 7 images that we used was of 2 men getting married. Nothing untoward there, except of course Facebook then did its thing, and all the trolls came out, and at no stage did I even hesitate in challenging back at what they were saying. It was the usual homophobic tropes that they just trot out. And I went by. I realized that this was an opportunity for us to challenge back, and at no stage did I even think that would be an issue. I didn't ask the question, and we got some great credibility off the back of it. Because
then that's about the strength of your value set and culture, which is inherently you knew what was acceptable as the organisation, which I think probably demonstrates how strong it is at your organisation.
That doesn't happen quickly. That's a 7-year process.
Yes,
you can't flick a switch and just get to that, because it doesn't. As you don't feel that. So it is. You've got to invest time in this, which is going back to the ROI question. Is what makes this so difficult. Is that it's not a black and white. We do this in social and we get this outcome on this timeline.
It's a very long journey. It is a journey, which is a cliche, but it is, and it does take time. I can absolutely imagine that. I want to talk about ESG in a sec, but can I just pick up on the kind of trolls and that aspect of what we do, which is how involved and how difficult do you think it's going to be on social platforms? This is a very wide-ranging question, but I guess ultimately it's like, what do you feel will be the future of some of these platforms where we have seen issues with, and I'm thinking about Twitter at the moment in terms of hate speech and the rise of that anonymous commentary. What do you think the future is for corporates on these platforms when they're faced with these kind of issues, and what can we do about it as communicators? And I apologise that it's a massive question, but
it is a big old question.
Any thoughts on that? Welcomed, really.
Yeah, look, that's got to be when you're deciding to do social. That has to be in your early phases of deciding whether and how you're going to deal with it. One is social media policy, which is a different conversation. I think you've covered that before, and giving people permission to do what they do from an internal perspective. The next thing is how do we deal with escalation? How do we debate it, and how do we resource things like that? Now, actually, I think to give them some credit, the platforms like Twitter now, where you can restrict who can reply. So if you know you're heading into interesting territory, you can restrict the conversation that might happen before, which means you don't have to deal with it. You can hide things. I think they're getting a little bit better at dealing with it when it happens.
So I just want to round up with ESG comms you mentioned earlier and sustainability. We're in the run up to COP26. There's a real focus on it, and everybody seems to be, I'm going to say, jumping on the bandwagon.
Zurich has got a track record in kind of leaning into those issues, and a lot of other organisations have. But do you think we're going to see many more people and organisations jumping into this area? And how do we keep it authentic and avoid the whole greenwashing piece?
Yeah, and the authentic word is the absolute one there. I mean, you can't come out and start doing stuff if you're not whiter than white, if you haven't been doing your own reporting, if you haven't made progress, or you have to front up, right up, say, look, we've only just switched on to this. This is where we are now. We want to be far, far better up front. And if you're going in with that open policy on that subject, as I say with any subject, then I think that's all right. You kind of accept that it's not good, and you're doing something about it. As you said, we've been in this space and working on our company-wide approach on how we operate, how we do business with people, and the brand that we've got about doing the right thing. All those things play into each other. So I would like to think that our track record in this space means that we wouldn't get targeted or approached there, but we have to keep reminding ourselves that we have to keep focusing ourselves. Actually, I was thinking about printing over the weekend. We've taken out half the printers that we had, and we didn't have many to start with during the last 12 months, so that when people start to come back to the office, I mean, I can't remember the last time I printed anything from home from work perspective. We don't get back into the habit of reversing. I'm going to use the word good things that we've not been doing, because it's just not the right, in the context that we've been doing. But you get the point. We've got to keep reminding ourselves that we're doing that. We're thinking about how we travel as individuals. Do I need to go to the office, or can I work from here? Is that better for everything? As we find a balance in the new world. So yeah, I think we just got to. Undoubtedly, people will, because the environmental issues that we're talking about will become more front and center. I think we just got to keep authentic about it and keep trying to make sure that we're doing the right thing. As companies, we as individuals are doing what we can to do the right thing, and those things are all playing out as well.
And finally, just wrapping up then with community building, again, something you talked about earlier, which was that seems to be a real focus of what you've done. What do you think's been key to doing that successfully? It sounds like you've really engendered a sense of openness and collaboration. What do you think's at the heart of your success with that?
I think teamwork has to be teamwork and empowerment to get on with it. I think is the key thing that's worked for me. I say working across the organisation and with different teams and different leadership teams just to understand what's going on. The global organisation investing in workplace, I think was a core part of that. We used Yammer before it, but sporadically. So yeah, I think it's a long game, and you have to invest time and effort and resource into it, which might be costly. But there's an accepted line of sight there that investment does pay out. And we're 4 or 5 years into our internal social business journey, which is more about how we, I guess, become more social as as individuals, as organizations. That's why I talk about social business rather than social media. But we're a long time into that, and sometimes we have to remind ourselves that it does take a long time for these things to culture. But we've seen we use OHI internally, Organizational Health Index, and our numbers have gone up and up over the years. We've just had another good success on last year's survey. So it's all working. Can it pinpoint down to one particular thing? Probably not. But it just takes time, and you've got to keep plugging away at it, I think.
To that commitment. Brilliant. Finally, next big thing. I know you're on Clubhouse. We spoke earlier. You were dabbling over Christmas, but what do you think over the next 12 to 18 months we're going to see more of in social?
I think Clubhouse is an interesting one, but it actually plays nicely into my employee advocacy space, and that's what I'm talking about. Or when we're talking about employees being more active, that's employee advocacy. That's the term that we often use, employee influencers. And having those platforms that focus on individuals means that it has to shift from brand to people, and therefore I think it's helpful that we work on that. And I think that'll come up in different ways. The last 12 months has clearly seen everyone working in a very, very different way, and in a way that means they haven't been able to meet people face to face. I'm stating the obvious. So how have people got around that? Well, actually, they've started to be more active on LinkedIn, on their own social platforms, just to stay in touch with people. And that's brilliant. That's what I've been calling for years. They haven't, people, one of people's challenges back to me about social is I don't need it, because I'm out there seeing my brokers every day, my IFAs. I've got my monthly networking sessions, or our IFA learning groups, or the CI, whatever it is it might be. They haven't been happening. So now we're all shifting to an online learning environment, and we're using tools that we've got that's free and on our fingertips to stay in touch with people. And I'm hoping that will keep going, and that people will realize that organizations like ours, who are traditional, age-old firms who've been around for a very long time, we want you to do it. We want them to be more social, because ultimately it helps us as a company as well as the individual. So for me, it's a win-win of upping everyone's game. So I think we're going to start to see certainly more of that P2P stuff, person-to-person stuff in social. We're already seeing the rise of audio. Clubhouse is one. Twitter Spaces is the audio version of Clubhouse. Facebook apparently looking at something. It would amaze me if LinkedIn and Microsoft aren't doing something similar there. And again, it makes people, if they're not comfortable being on video, because many people aren't, maybe audio is the next best thing. You just switch your phone on and talk to a bunch of folk in a room.
Yeah.
Which is what lots of us are trying to do. So I think audio is probably one of those things. And I guess the invention of the smart speaker, I won't name them here, but we've all got little boxes on shelves that wake up when we talk to them and respond back. That's an opportunity and plays into that audio space. So yeah, I think audio and people and social are probably three things that we're going to not see any less of over the next year or so.
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you for gazing into the crystal ball, and thanks for your time today. It's been great to have you and great to speak to you. Thank you so much, and take care. Thank you.
Thanks very much.